Welcome to this presentation. Today we're going to be discussing how educators can build positive relationships for elementary level students. In this presentation, we will be taking a look at specific activities and techniques to support and foster positive relationships between students and reduce the likelihood of bullying behaviors. We will also look at how to help students who exhibit bullying behaviors. Why do we need positive student relationships? They build social emotional learning skills, which can help develop respectful attitudes and appropriate communication skills. It can also help develop conflict resolution skills and helping students understand the concept of empathy. As a result of this, it can help students understand and regulate their own emotions so they can develop awareness and empathy of others. For this presentation, it is important to keep child development in mind as you observe these activities and techniques. Younger children will not necessarily have the skill set, vocabulary, or experience to deal with conflict, bullying, or developing relationships with others outside of their family or home life. It is important to consider what your objective is and the skill set that you want to focus on in developing for a younger student. There are many resources available to teach us about bullying and bullying behaviors. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're just going to look at a quick overview. We know that there are two domains of bullying, physical and emotional. Even forcing others to participate in either domain is considered a bullying behavior as well. Individuals who are targets of bullying can be those with disabilities, those of the LGBTQ community, and those of different races and religions. Cyberbullying is also significant as it involves the use of internet and various online platforms to engage and share inappropriate content about targeted individuals. And these can cause complications when the individual exhibiting the bullying behavior is not as easily identified. We can also see that younger children between the ages of 2 and 5 have already experienced some form of bullying or been exposed to it. And we also have to consider the fact that as a child advances in their development, the type of bullying can evolve from more physical bullying to emotional bullying. Also, for the purposes of this presentation, when we use the term bully, this is being referred to as a student with a bullying behavior. We never want to title a student as a bully because this does not refer to how a student is identified. It's also important to remind children and students that even though they exhibit bullying behaviors, they can be changed or modified. So what can we do? There are many credible sources out there to help us identify signs of bullying, but what activities can we implement? There are 5 areas here we will look at today to help give you ideas to implement in your own classroom. They are creating an environment for positive relationships, peer accountability, creating dialogue for students and teachers, implementing options for students to prevent and improve behavior, and documentation. So let's look at some classroom activities to promote these positive relationships. So those of us who know or are familiar with the concept of a word wall know that this is beneficial for students who are working on their English language arts skills. So we have a couple of examples here, and the way we can use this is we can create and list adjectives to describe characteristics of a good friend. So by starting to create this positive language, students are going to be able to use that to describe others, even themselves, which can also build self-esteem. Students can create their own phrases, such as "we play with anyone and everyone," which should ideally fit within your own classroom management style and your philosophy. You can extend this activity by students being able to create their own individual collages, such as using magazine cutouts, or like in the top right-hand corner we have here, this is used with a website called EdWordle, where you can list all of the adjectives and words that could describe, for example, a good friend, like athletic, loving, true, graceful, understanding, kind. And that can help them describe individuals, whether it's their own classmates or specific peers. And it's important to have these displayed in the classroom so that way students can view them all the time. Additionally, this can help them increase their vocabulary skills and, in some cases, their sentence structure. Another type of activity you can use is using visual performing arts. So you can use this with or without technology. So ideally, in both situations, what students would do is create, with small groups, a type of video that would display a bullying or conflict situation where they would talk about the feelings of both the student exhibiting the bullying behaviors and the targeted individual, and then sharing their solutions. How would they deal with it if they were facing that situation? This will get them to think about your classroom expectations and what they would do to support someone. Students could also use it to create an informative video or presentation of how to help someone who has been bullied or how they would improve a situation. So this will engage their critical thinking and be able to figure out how they can develop ideas that will work with your classroom. Now, doing that type of activity might be more suitable for children who are third grade and above. This idea might be better for possibly early childhood through second grade, where you can use these stories for read-alouds. You can use these books either as read-aloud, choral reading, or having them available in your classroom for independent reading. If you decide to use this either in small groups or for read aloud, students can work on making predictions and having open-ended discussions as you read the story, such as will they react the same as the character or would they do something different? You can also have students observe the titles and the cover pages. What emotions do they notice? How are they aware of the negative impact of bullying? The next domain we're going to look at is activities to help develop peer accountability. So both of these can be used either for conflict resolution or helping students find peers that can help them deal with certain relationships and how to make them more positive. So both of these ideas, the first one is one I have used personally. It is called Conflict Managers. We used this at the school I worked at, and it was for fourth graders and up. And the students that were selected by their teachers and our administration. And their responsibilities would be that students would report to a conflict manager, specifically at times outside the classroom, so like recess or lunch. And what they would do is students would go to the conflict managers first for a non-threatening, non-emergency situation, such as if there was an argument about a game that two students were playing, or possibly if someone was calling a student a name. The conflict manager would ultimately handle the situation, and then they would fill out a document, like a worksheet, that would state the problem, how it was resolved, and if an adult needed to be involved in the resolution. Most of the time, the student was able to help resolve the situation, and students would continue to visit the conflict manager. Another activity you can do in the classroom that I created here is called I'm All Ears. So this is where you can have your students pair up, and they talk to each other specifically at a time of day that you designate, and it will teach your students about taking turns talking. So you can either have the students just talk for 10 minutes, 5 minutes for one, 5 for the other, and you would have them talk, and then the other person would have to listen. So you can also present a guiding question, such as describe a good friend today, or talk about something that bothered you. if you want to throw in to get them thinking about what they could talk about. When the activity is over, each peer needs to be able to share what they heard and remember from the conversation about that person. This will help them not only develop their listening skills, but it will also help students develop confidence and rapport that should they ever be in a situation where they need to talk to a friend or get help from a friend, they are more confident in doing so. Then you can end the activity with a respectful comment such as, "Thank you for sharing that with me," or "Thank you for listening to me." Now we want to look at how we can create appropriate dialogue for students and teachers. So if it's just students, we want to look at how do we look at cues and also finding activities that have more of an open-ended structure. And then, of course, for the teachers, what are some do's and don'ts? So let's first look at the teachers because we are the role models and leaders of our classroom. We definitely want to get all information explanation from students that are involved separately and away from other students. So whenever you have a conflict or bullying situation, it's very important to make sure that you're not addressing it with too many people, so that way students are not reinforcing the behavior. You certainly want to be objective. Ask as many questions as appropriate, and if you saw it happen, state it as you saw it. Validate emotions. You may see students who are clenching their fists, who grunt, who are visibly crying. Validate those emotions because, again, they may not have the vocabulary to express what they're feeling, especially in that moment. You can also explain how the actions result in specific reactions based on the information you were given. So, for example, if I have two students, student A and student B, if student A called student B a big head, rather than saying, "That was rude of you to call him big head," it's important to look at the whole situation. Because if student B punched student A or pushed him in the back, that would probably be the reason why he would have called that student a big head. So it's very important that you help the students recognize that for every action, there's a reaction. You want to make sure that you do not use phrases such as "stop it" and not address the behavior. Telling the student that they need to simply ignore it may not be sufficient enough according to the situation, because younger children are only going to have patience for so long and they will eventually react at some point. You also want to make sure that you have clear expectations. You never want to say, "Let's talk about this later," without giving a definite time and place where you're going to continue the conversation depending on the situation. This can make the targeted student feel that they're not being supported. Now, for students, you can use cue cards. This can help students understand how to look at nonverbal communication, such as facial expressions, body positioning, tone of voice, and personal space. And this is good for younger students to help them understand what they need to look at as to why a certain situation may have come up. For older students, you can use these questions without the cards as a guide to help them understand how another person's body or nonverbal communication would have given them clues to know how they were feeling. So you can, again, develop more on the cue cards by having students kind of create their own dialogue when they're working something out with another peer. Now, this can be used to revisit a bullying or conflict situation, such as if they were to encounter a particular event again, what would they do differently? Because if that child or student were facing that situation again, what might they change from the previous event? Students can also use this to talk about, for example, how to be a kind friend. You can use this to have students create a script on their own of what they might say to someone who might be new to the school or might need to make more friends. This can be used as a technique to rehearse and reinforce. Now, in some instances where there is a bullying situation, The teacher can use a bully report. This is where we get information from the student with the bullying behavior to explain from their perspective what happened. So in this report that I created, it kind of addresses the who, what, when, where, and why, and how they're going to make the situation resolved or amend it. And so this is also going to help them reflect on their own behavior when the event happened. Were they angry? Were they upset? Were they nervous? So as a teacher, you can connect that when the event happened, there might have been something else going on. But it also shows that for some students, they will find a way to make it right. What are they going to do to make sure it either is less likely to happen, or what are they going to need to do to change their behavior? So now we're looking at more so of finding the appropriate actions that teachers can use more so in a bullying situation and hopefully increase the likelihood of now creating a positive, respectful relationship. We want to be able to empower the student that had been bullied and also helping the student with the bullying behavior recognize that their behavior needs to change and that they've impacted that individual or individuals in a particular way. Ultimately, you're going to have to consider personalizing your ideas according to your students. But if you need a little guidance, here's some ideas. We can continue to use the cue cards. Again, this will help you learn to communicate and talk out ideas. We might want to issue a particular loss of privilege or reward opportunity to remind the student that that behavior is not accepted, and we want to make sure that we don't want to continue to have that loss of privilege, but for that situation in that time, they're not going to have that opportunity. It is important to monitor the interaction between, say, the student who was targeted and the student with the bullying behavior, or that issues a lot of conflict or doesn't have a positive relationship. We want to make sure that includes doing things like modify your seating arrangements and group assignments. The student could also write a letter of apology. Depending on the situation, this can just be to the targeted student directly, possibly also to that targeted student's parent, because we want the student to know that it doesn't necessarily just affect the student alone, it's also going to affect that student's parent or guardian. It's also important to create a nonverbal communication system for the student who has been bullied. So in case if the behavior comes up again, you are more aware before something escalates. You can also do it for a student who exhibits bullying behavior, where if they're starting to feel angry or upset, they will have a way to let you know that, and then they can come to you for help. If necessary, you can issue a behavior contract for the specific repeated behavior and discuss this with the student who's exhibiting the behavior and the parent. Another example of that could also be that you can have the student with the bullying behavior talk about how to prepare for a parent conference. So if you have to talk to that student's parent about their behavior or how they are not yet developing positive relationships, what are we going to tell the parent? So that way it keeps them accountable. And even if they can only be part of the conversation for a few minutes of time to explain a situation or explain the solutions that you and your student are going to implement in the classroom, that will be sufficient. Documentation is really, really important. So at any point when you are seeing any type of bullying behavior, repeated behavior, or you're looking at the relationship between one or more students to see what behaviors are occurring and the antecedents, documentation is absolutely important. Always seek out whatever documentation your school provides, and for mandated reporting, make sure you seek administration support and legal implications as needed. You can offer for older students, 5th and above, to look at a particular website called Bully Report Online if they want to file it electronically. If they feel more confident filling something out at their own home, they can absolutely do that. And if your school has a school safety officer, they will receive the report and they will be able to follow up within 24 hours. If you want to create your own type of documentation, this is an example that I've personally used with my students to help track specific behaviors and document any changes that have occurred with the student. So I have as much objective information I would need to fill out as I can, different categories of specific incidences that the situation falls under. This does include bullying, but it could also connect with a serious threat or concern. Was a student bullying, but also saying, I'm going to hurt this person? Then, of course, you have a description of the behavior as you saw it or what you heard. Then you can describe what action you took, such as first aid, parent contact, any additional consequences such as a loss of privilege or, in some schools, detention. Any additional notes, and then, of course, including your signature or verification. And if it's viewed with the parent, you can include their signature and make them a copy. So this is just an example of how you might want to document any information and keep on a student's file. So that way you're able to track behaviors. And again, feel confident that when you present this to anyone, you know that it has been acknowledged and you have as much objective information as you can. Again, documentation is really important because you want to make sure that you have as much information and it shows that you are able to encourage positive behaviors when you come up with ideas based on the information you are given. So thank you for viewing this presentation. I hope these are all ideas you can implement in your own classroom to foster positive relationships and develop confidence in managing bullying and other conflict behaviors within your classroom and school environment. And these are all of the references that were used for this presentation to support and validate my ideas.